The victory in Tunisia, in May 1943, opened new opportunities for the Allies. What seemed like a logical next step was to keep the momentum built in North Africa, and go across the Mediterranean Sea, to bring the fighting into Europe, beginning with the Italian shores. However, the Allies landing on the Italian mainland almost never happened. Supreme Allies Commander, in the Mediterranean theater, General Dwight Eisenhower, and officers at his headquarters, had reservations about committing to war in Italy. Eisenhower was eager to open a second front in Europe as soon as possible, and he was afraid that fighting in Italy would take much of the needed resources from the main landing in Western Europe. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, on the other hand, insisted on invasion to knock Italy out of the war. Fully aware that invasion of Western Europe would not be possible until 1944, he skillfully used two conferences, the first one in Casablanca in January, and later the Trident Conference in Washington, in May 1943, to persuade President Roosevelt to proceed with the attack on Italy. Finally, a compromise has been reached, and only after Eisenhower received assurances that any offensive in Italy would be conducted with the limited forces, and would not prevent the transfer of troops and supplies from Europe, he agrees to proceed with the offensive. For the Allies, the Italian campaign had multiple objectives. The most important objective was the unconditional capitulation of Italy, and the surrender of the Italian fleet, which still posed a great threat to the British Mediterranean fleet. The other objectives were to take the air bases in southern Italy, and prevent Axis airstrikes against shipping in the Mediterranean, secure sea lines from Gibraltar to Egypt and Suez Canal, and at the same time to gain the air bases for a further bombing campaign against Germany and its allies. The final objective was to tie down and divert from other fronts as many German divisions as possible. As Churchill believed, the quick surrender of the Italian army would force the Germans to shift at least 20 divisions to Italy and the Balkans, where the Italian army had a strong presence. And of course, there were plenty of political reasons behind this campaign, but these are not the topic of this strictly military analysis. On the other side, the Germans were also reluctant to defend the Italian peninsula. Adolf Hitler considered Italy to be indefensible, and his advisers recommended that he withdraw the German troops to the Po Valley, to avoid them becoming trapped in the Italian peninsula. Only after the intervention of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of the German army in the Mediterranean, who persuaded him that Italy could be held, Hitler changed his mind. Kesselring believed that the Allies should be kept as far away from Germany as possible. He realized that terrain in Italy, especially in winter, favored the defender, and with limited forces, he intended to do exactly the same as Allies did. To tie down as many Allies troops, and to drag them into the battle of attrition, as they advanced through the Italian peninsula. To gain a foothold on the other side of the Mediterranean, the Allies decided to invade Sicily first. The next step was to land on mainland Italy. But the question was, where and how? The shape of the Italian peninsula allowed the Allies to choose where to attack. If they launched the amphibious assault somewhere along the Italian coast, they would avoid exhausting fighting in harsh terrain, to push the Axis troops from the southern tip of the peninsula. As the defenders had to retreat above the landing site, if they wanted to escape the encirclement. The Adriatic coast was quickly ruled out as a potential option, because it was too far from the air and naval bases. On the western side of Italy, the Allies, mainly underestimating the German strength, considered various options, and created many plans. Some of them even called for a parachute landing on Rome. Finally, the planners narrowed the potential landing sites on beaches close to Naples and Rome. The area around Rome was also ruled out as being too far from air bases in Sicily and North Africa. After careful review, the final decision was to land at the Gulf of Salerno near Naples. The main objective of the operation, codenamed Avalanche, was to take Naples and the city's port facilities. By capturing Naples, the planners believed the Axis forces would withdraw from southern Italy, and at the same time, the Allies would gain the vital port for the shipping of supplies and reinforcements necessary for the further advance northwards, towards Rome. The over-optimistic planners did not anticipate that demoralized Italian troops would offer any significant resistance, so they expected the Allies would take Naples a few days after the landing. The combined 15th Army Group, under the command of General Sir Harold Alexander, composed of the 5th U.S. Army and the British 8th Army, formed the main force responsible for the land operations in Italy. The task to carry out Operation Avalanche was given to the 5th U.S. Army, under Lieutenant General Mark Clark. Meanwhile, a few days before Operation Avalanche, the British 8th Army, under General Bernard Montgomery, would cross the narrow Straits of Messina, in the vicinity of Reggio di Calabria, in a separate operation called Baytown, and proceed with the advance up the boot of Italy. On August 17, 1943, after more than 1 month of fighting, the Battle of Sicily was over. The Allies immediately began the final preparations for the next objective, the invasion of Italy. However, the victory in Sicily was not complete, as the Axis successfully evacuated most of the troops and equipment across the Messina Strait. Right after the successful evacuation, Kesselring began with the defensive preparations. His main force in Italy was the 10th Army, under General Heinrich von Vietinghoff, split into 2 panzer corps. Although badly mauled in Sicily, the divisions of the 10th Army remained a well-led, highly motivated, and thoroughly professional force. The 3 divisions of the 14 Panzer Corps, under General Hermann Black, were spread along the Italian western coast. Panzer Division Hermann Goering, under Lieutenant General Eberhard Roth, was in the process of refitting near Naples, after suffering heavy losses in Sicily. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, under Major General Wilhelm Schmaltz, was stationed near Gaeta, north of Naples, and the 16th Panzer Division, under Lieutenant General Rudolf Siechenius, was deployed in the Salerno plain. The bulk of the 76th Panzer Corps, under General Traugott-Hare, defended southern Italy. On September 3, the 13th Corps of the British 8th Army launched Operation Baytown, crossing the Straits of Messina, without virtually any resistance. A few days later, divisions of the 5th U.S. Army sailed from the ports in North Africa and headed for Salerno. Although by name American, the 5th Army was a mixed force, consisting of the British 10th Corps, under the command of Lieutenant General Richard L. McCreary, and the U.S. 6th Corps, under Major General Ernest Dawley. The British 10th Corps was to carry out the main assault, with its 2 divisions. The corps would land on the left, just below the port of Salerno. Due to the shortage of the landing crafts, the 46th Division would land with only 1 brigade on the left, while the 56th Division would land on the right with its 2 brigades in the first wave, on the beaches codenamed Uncle, Sugar, and Roger. In subsequent waves, the 2 remaining brigades of the 46th Division would reinforce the initial brigade-sized landing force, while the 3rd Brigade of the 56th Division was to remain on the ships as a floating reserve, alongside the 7th Armored Division. The 3 U.S. Ranger battalions, attached to the 10th Corps, would land at the small port of Maori, and 2 British Commandos Battalion would land at Vitry, to protect the left flank of the main assault. Meanwhile, on the far side of the River Selle, at the right flank, the U.S. 6th Corps would land only 1 of its 2 divisions on the first day, in front of the ruins of Paestum. The U.S. 36th Infantry Division would lead the assault with 2 regiments. The U.S. 45th Infantry Division would form a floating reserve, while the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division would form a strategic reserve, based in the Sicilian airfields. Both corps of the Fifth Army had a clear and simple task in the first phase of the landing. Since the flat coastal plain of Salerno was ringed by mountains, which would give German artillery observers a grandstand view of the beachhead, it was crucial to seize the high ground and passes through the mountains before the Germans. The task of the 56th Division was to advance across the Salerno plain and seize Montecorvino airfield, which lay 5 kilometers inland, and the town of Battipaglia, which lay 7 kilometers from the coast. The 46th Division would advance 5 kilometers to Salerno and seize the port before the Germans could bring in reinforcements. On the right flank, the mission of the 36th Division was to capture the high ground overlooking the Salerno plain and prevent German forces from entering the plain from the south and east. In the subsequent phase, the 7th Armoured Division would land on already secured beaches to help the British 10th Corps in advance on Naples, while the divisions of the US 6th Corps would take the defensive positions on high ground overlooking the Salerno, until they linked up with the advancing troops of the 8th Army. The Gulf of Salerno was empty of the landing obstacles and poorly defended, with only parts of the area immediately behind the beach covered with land mines. Small numbers of coastal defenses in the vicinity were in Italian hands. The German defense in the area relied mainly on artillery batteries deployed in the foothills behind the Salerno plain, with observation and strong points situated on the surrounding hills. From these positions, the forward observers could guide artillery to bring down the accurate fire on the attackers and keep the Allies under observation and artillery fire as they moved inland. Furthermore, the German units in southern Italy were mechanized, able to move fast and positioned to cover a large area. For that reason, the German strategy was to stop the Allies in their bridgehead until sufficient forces arrived to launch a major counterattack, which would attempt to drive the enemy into the sea. Meanwhile, the invasion force steadily approached Italy. A few days after they left the ports, the convoys rendezvoused in the Tyrrhenian Sea. As the ships rounded at the western tip of Sicily, the German aircrafts spotted the invasion fleet. During the voyage, the Luftwaffe carried out sporadic air raids and monitored the fleet's progress. The Great Armada, with more than 450 ships of the Operation Avalanche invasion force, had no other option but to continue their way to Salerno. As the men aboard the ships made the final preparations for the landing, they were confident that an easy task lays ahead. No one expected that Italian troops would put any major resistance. Little did they know that in secrecy, fateful events began to unfold. While the fighting on Sicily still raged on, Italian King Victor Emmanuel III overthrew the government led by Benito Mussolini, and ordered the arrest of the Italian dictator. The newly appointed Italian government began the secret negotiations about the unconditional surrender with the Allies. Because of fear of the German reprisals, two sides agreed to announce armistice after the Allies landed in Italy. However, on September 8, while ships had just reached the Gulf of Salerno, General Eisenhower publicly broadcasted news about Italy's surrender. The cheers of rejoicing spread in the troopships, as many hoped the landing would be unopposed. Unfortunately for them, the Germans were quick to react. Following a pre-agreed plan, German units in Italy quickly set out to disarm the troops of their former ally, and occupy their bases, fortifications, and airports. That night, German troops took over the Italian beach defenses and coastal gun batteries overlooking the Gulf of Salerno. When dawn came, the Germans were ready and waiting. At 1:30 a.m., on September 9, 1943, the Great Invasion Armada had entered the Gulf of Salerno. Immediately, light cruisers and destroyers began with naval gunfire preparation. At 3:20 a.m., On the left flank of the invasion beach, the men of the 4th Ranger Battalion stormed the small beach in front of Maori. The Battle of Salerno has begun.